So, question of the day. Am I a god? I certainly felt different growing up, but that was most likely due to my early onset neurodivergence, and not because of some secret godly powers. I'm still very probably human. But you see, I'm an A-Life developer, and I've been working on this evolution simulation, the Bibbits, for quite a few years now, constantly adding features and complexity that allow for simulated biological systems and evolution over generations. Some Bibbits, these adorable creatures, have even achieved complexity rivaling tardigrades. Every day, hundreds of simulations are run across the globe, pushing the limits of what's possible. And with the recent launch of the simulation on Steam, that exploration is accelerating, and new evolved behaviors and dynamics keep being discovered. The Bibbits are now everywhere, and I think the Bibbits are a form of life. I'm sure I have triggered many people with this proclamation, as they would argue only gods have the power to create something with this magical property. So what is it? Am I a god? Is life just not that special? Or am I a pretentious and delusional programmer that has been inhaling CPU fumes for a bit too long? It's time to really challenge my biases and ask the tough question, are the Bibbits alive? Welcome to the incredible world of the Bibbits. So first off, what even is life? This might feel a little silly to ask. We all know what life is, and can usually tell within 5 seconds of staring at something if it's alive or not. But here lies a problem. Aliveness is not a measurable quantity. It's a feeling, a certain je ne sais quoi, a bit of namakosine sprinkled on top, just to flex my trilinguality. As a subject, it's equal parts science and philosophy, and everyone intuitively feels what it means to be alive in a slightly different way. As an example, nowadays, most scientists will agree that viruses don't make the cut, but they still feel somewhat alive, or at least to possess some of that magical spice. Even our very savvy audience remained notably split on the subject, and many people advanced some very convincing arguments. I'd suggest reading through. Agreeing on the definition would allow us to have a definitive answer when pondering the aliveness of something. So, it's no surprise this has caused many debates throughout history. Even way back in ancient Greece, the subject sparked unending back and forths between the philosophical giants of the time, Aristotle and Plato. Plato believed in the metaphysical idea of forms, perfect concepts outside of the real, like justice, love, beauty, or life, although at the time they called it the soul, linking the ideas of life and consciousness together. You might have heard of Plato's allegory of the cavern. To him, the physical world was akin to shadows being cast on a wall, only approximations and depthless projections of the far more real and perfect forms. And multiple such forms could blend and interact to create new ideas, shadows, objects, and such. So, to him, life was a metaphysical and divine property that imbued things with varying degrees of aliveness, and gave them the ability to want, feel, think, and act. To Plato, the Bibbits probably couldn't have been alive, since they are just a collection of lines of codes, and I sadly forgot to put in the line for giving them souls. Still, I like to think about how Plato would have reacted if confronted with Bibbits. He probably would have just beat me up and called me a nerd. He was notoriously jacked. In contrast, his student Aristotle disagreed and viewed life as being indistinguishable from the body. In simpler terms, if it does, it is. The important things were the behaviors themselves, and anything displaying these behaviors would be considered alive. He then further viewed being alive as a hierarchy. The vegetative soul denoted the capacity to grow, feed, and propagate. The sensitive soul added perception, movement, and desires. And finally, the rational soul added consciousness, language, and rational thinking. To Aristotle, life wasn't a yes-no property, but a spectrum. He notably spent a sizable portion of his life ranking every species he could identify in a book, The History of Animals, and arranging them in multiple grades in order of perfection, with humans at the top, of course. Maybe that was even the first ever tier list. Of course, this being the antiquity, his definition had plenty of weird specificities, like how being hot and wet were important properties to be ranked higher. To him, turtles would be less alive than frogs, because their shells would make them drier somehow. The ancient Greeks had their quirks. Most importantly, the Bibbits would have been alive to Aristotle. They grow throughout their lifespan, they eat matter to extract energy, and lay eggs to reproduce. They can perceive their environment through their input neurons, act and move through the world thanks to their output neurons choosing their actions and behaviors. And they certainly sometimes seem to want things. While I may have had to run away from Plato, at least Aristotle would have contemplated adding the Bibbits to his book. Maybe even placing them in C tier, along with various Greek insects. So, let's summarize. Here we already see a significant divide in philosophies. Is life metaphysical, being handed down by a higher power, or is it just what we call a set of observables? For the Plato camp, the Bibbits probably aren't alive as they are a physical creation, a collection of rules and heuristics that simply emulate what I think life looks like. No matter how much I improve the simulation, it's gonna remain a simulation. A puppet show, trying to look like shadows of the real on the wall of a cave. The other prevailing view is that life is an emergent property, something that arises from inert things, something that is just an observed phenomenon, and that we can try to define. Since we're working toward a definition, and I have a bit of a bias toward materialism, the idea of nothing being metaphysical, that's the philosophy we're going to continue with. Sorry, Group 1, but I want to emphasize that I'm not claiming victory over you here. This is just a choice I'm making. In the end, no one knows for certain what's actually going on, and definitions are arbitrary and always fuzzy when you start being a little more inquisitive. So if this is you, please give us your opinions and feel free to debate in the comment sections under this video. It's genuinely interesting for me to read everyone's point, and it's very good for the algorithm. Still, I think we should make a list of interesting ideas and points we'll encounter throughout to help us with building our definition later. We'll retain a few ideas put forward by Aristotle here. Alive things can feed and consume, to grow and propagate, and they can perceive their world, to move and react. As for consciousness, while it's a fascinating subject in its own right, we'll discard that last soul to focus on life itself as we conceive of nowadays. Moving through the ages, the main theories for what life was went through the ebb and flows of civilizations, religions, and cultures, but a notable mention is the idea of spontaneous generation, a common theory of the Middle Ages and before, that explained life as spontaneously generating from common materials when they interacted with varying ethereal substances. Us humans and other large mammals could obviously reproduce, but for all the other stuff, they basically spawned into existence by themselves. Like it being widely believed that mice would spawn from grains and dirty clothes touching for a while, or maggots being rotten meat turned alive. While I fully understand the appeal of its simplicity, it's very surprising to me that it took until 1668 for someone to realize, hey guys, we can test that pretty easily. and decided to put 3 jars of meat side to side, one sealed, one covered with cloth, and the other open, to behold, damn, maggots come from flies laying eggs? The scientific method took a while to get started, but hey, it took that experiment to reach the still baffling realization that for all life forms, babies come from parents. From then on, that became a pretty strong component of the idea of life, and one we can take note of for later. Live things can reproduce and make copies of themselves. Moving forward, it would be a crime to not at least mention Darwin, the father of evolution. While he stayed famously silent on the question of life's definition, apparently disliking the kind of exercise we're currently going through, he was the first to highlight to this degree the importance of evolution in life's functioning and resulting dynamics. The idea seems simple in hindsight. When things reproduce, there's going to be some variations. Some variations lead to better adaptation and can result in those individuals being more competitive and, in the end, having more children, spreading that adaptation through the population and specializing different individuals to different environments. Over many generations, we can expect this to compound and accumulate, leading to completely different descendants of the same ancestor and filling new and different ecological niches. Thus, we can expect most, if not all, living systems to display evolution. Adding evolution itself as a criterion for life is still debated, but at least most people agree that it's a natural consequence of life's working, so we'll take note of it. With time and the scientific method letting us reap what we sowed, we learned a bunch of things about biology. We invented microscopes, we discovered microbes and germs, cells and DNA. And while all that taught us a lot about how life worked here on Earth, it only heated the debate about its definition. Just like that one friend we collectively seem to have in our friend group that reads the first chapter of a philosophy book and reinvents their whole personality overnight, we started defining life through the myopic lens of our newfound knowledge. Like, life is the process by which DNA replicates itself through cellular structures. Life is a network of carbon-based molecules capable of metabolism and evolution. Life is a system composed of cells that carry out metabolic processes to sustain existence. Those definitions are what we call Earth-chauvinistic, meaning that they are based on the observed mechanisms of life on Earth. Of course, as Earth as the only example of naturally occurring life we've discovered so far, we must base our definition on those observables. But an important distinction I want to put forth is the difference between mechanics and dynamics. Mechanics are the substrate, the interactions that make the dynamics happen. In our case, the cells, the DNA, the chemistry, or even physics itself. While the dynamics are the things that actually happen, the observable behaviors, reproduction, growth, movement, etc. And in the end here, we're talking about semantics. There's no right answers, and that's why there's still so many debates around this, and around many other definitions in fact. I personally think that we should try to focus on the observable dynamics, just like Aristotle best stated, if it does, it is. After all, for most things in life, do we really care about the way something is done, as long as it's being done? Just because the first chairs were made out of wood by early carpenters, should we really have defined them as something made out of wood by a carpenter for the purpose of sitting on, and exclude all future sitting tools made from any other materials like metal or through any other manufacturing methods like robotic assembly? Or should a chair just be something that you can sit on? Although I guess that would make a horse a chair. Whatever, let's not get lost. Chairs aren't today's topic. But you see what I mean. I think that adding reference to the mechanics of life runs into the issue of needlessly constricting our views and potentially missing out on recognizing the aliveness of life forms that only committed the crime of not using the exact same tools to achieve the same results. Even NASA, who defines life as a self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution, attempted to broaden the definition so it could apply to future discoveries of alien life that may not have DNA or even be carbon-based. But still, they remained mechanistic in the sense where they exclude any non-chemistry-based life forms from qualifying, like the potential topological defect-based lifeforms theorized by some researchers in a paper presented on PBS Spacetime some time ago. Fortunately, the field of biology, aside from sounding like our very impressible friend for a bit, did end up teaching us useful things about the dynamics of life. Who would have thought? Namely, the discovery of cells did inform that all life seemed to be organized, and the idea that life forms should probably have a given body or structure that differentiate them from their environment, an inside and an outside, now seems ubiquitous. If there's no clear boundaries between you and out, how can there be a you or an out? And how could you prevent that difference from simply dissolving throughout the environment and dissipating? Add it to the list. And with this organization, to protect your difference, naturally comes the idea of regulating your internal state to preserve that difference. There is a natural tendency for entropy to want to spread energy and molecular concentrations, equalizing everything everywhere. Even with the best skin or membrane, your internal heat would eventually dissipate and drop to the ambient level. So you need processes and mechanisms in place to maintain and preserve your internal state. Add it. And finally, what flows naturally from this is that nothing is free in physics. Entropy is a cruel mistress, and fighting it, hoping to prevent your difference from simply dissolving into nothingness, is a very costly endeavor. In general, any act of work against the basic rules of physics requires energy, and so the idea that life has to develop the ability to acquire, transform, store, and use energy is tautological. Noted. So here we are. We've walked across time from the beginning of this very question to now, taking notes of important insights garnered along the way. And I think we're ready to build our definition. The first criteria that now seems completely unavoidable is organization. Life forms need a definitive structure. Like said earlier, how can you be something if you're not separate from the rest? From this then, we add the criteria of homeostasis, the regulation of an internal state, so that the inside retains a relative stability despite what goes on outside. And I think we can combine the ideas of energy usage and eating into a criterion for metabolism, the transformation and use of energy. That should cover any pathway from consumption, digestion, storage, and usage. With this ability, another good use of energy is movement. But that's not really exclusive. Some life forms don't move. But if we combine that with all other concepts like feeling and reacting, we can settle on response to stimuli. Organisms must be able to sense their environments and react to changes. All forms of life at least react in some way to things. It just makes sense. After this, the idea of making copies of yourself follows simply, so we add the criterion of reproduction. Life forms must have the ability to produce new individuals based on the originator individual or individuals for sexual reproduction. Now, from a purely physical perspective with reproduction, you kinda need to be bigger to be able to create a copy. Even for microbes that just split in two halves, you need to grow. Otherwise, life forms would just get smaller by half each generation. So it seems pretty important to add the criteria of growth. Organisms must use energy to increase their size or structure. And finally, why not add the last criteria as adaptation? Evolution must be possible, allowing individuals to adapt to their environment over generations. Oh, and would you look at that? We combined the insights from all the little notes we took of all the different sources, and we arrived exactly at the definition detailed under the Wikipedia article for life. What a crazy coincidence! This definition is based on several scientific publications asking that very question, and compiling opinions from experts across all the relevant fields. This is the most accepted descriptive definition of what life is. It does not mean that it's the right one, or that any other definition is officially wrong, but it's the one I'm going to be using from now on. So, just for posterity, let's finally answer the question, are the Bibbits alive? The source code behind the Bibbits defines the environment and gives Bibbit their structure, like their body and their different organs and systems. It also defines lots of internal properties and variables, like health, energy, that Bibbits needs to self-regulate if they want to survive. In order to do so, they need to consume food, digest it to extract the contained energy, can store it in the form of fat, and must expend energy to sustain themselves, and for any other action. Bibbits have neural network brains that allow them to sense their environment, process that information, and react accordingly. They need to grow to have enough physical space in their egg organ to physically fit eggs that, when laid, contain a soon-to-hatch copy of the original parent Bibbit. And finally, as this is an evolution simulation after all, mutations can alter the Bibbit's genotype on reproduction, so that through generations, Bibbit change and evolve to adapt to fill niches or better compete against one another. So, yeah, using this definition, the Bibbits are alive. They check every box. And I already know many of you will have troubles with such a definition based on these specific criteria. But that's the one I settled on, and again, the one I refer to when I say that the Bibbits are alive. I respect anyone's right to prefer and use another definition that fits more with their point of view or their preferences. And I will even recognize that the Bibbits might not be considered alive under their different definition. The only thing I ask is that you extend the same courtesy toward the Bibbits, and recognize this definition when I make this claim. But I will say I'm very interested in any perspective that is different from mine, so I would encourage everyone to detail their own views and discuss, respectfully of course, with others in the comment section under this video. I look forward to reading many interesting points. Quickly, I just want to remind you that the simulation is out on Steam, allowing you to run and host your own artificial life simulations on your own computer. And we even recently published a new version, 0.6.2, which is out now. As always, it's also fully available for free on our website. A video should come out very soon with more details about the update, and with a very special announcement too. I want to again take the time to thank everybody making this project possible through their support. It's crazy that my full-time job is to develop new forms of life. It's also always complicated and awkward to explain to new people or at family functions when I'm it with the famous, "What do you do for work?" followed by the usual, who the hell pays you for that? But I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Thanks to all my Patreons for giving a firm base to my finances, which allowed and keeps allowing me to take the risk and work on this silly little project. thanks to the people who bought the stem on Steam for bringing in more funds and allowing us to start looking into expanding the team. And thanks to you all, scientifically curious people, for following the project and nerding out on it, often even more than I do. And so, without further ado, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.